And thank you all for being so prompt. Would you like to put the presentation up for us, Esther? So we're going to take a few minutes to introduce everyone to what the locality operational groups are, and to let you have sight of the contents of the impact report. And then Andy McWhirter will be taking you through the learning points and recommendations briefly. The main part of the meeting is to hear from members of the logs about their experiences, and then we'll have a chance to discuss some of your questions. If you'd like to put your questions in the chat while the people from the logs are talking, that'd be very helpful for us. Could you write your name and organization in the chat now, please? So that we can all know what the representation in the meeting is. Thanks very much for doing that. And let's have a look at the locality operational groups and who is involved. So we have 12 council, NHS, and voluntary sector staff who know local and citywide supports and services in each of the groups. And those groups provide information about supports and services to meet the needs of a child, young person, parent, or carer. The log meeting is on a Thursday, and any professional in the city who works with a child, young person, parent, or carer can send information about needs to the log using an online form. So we can help when there are challenges in finding the right support or service. And the log will discuss the needs, and we then assign a case lead. So a member of the log will respond with those ideas about how people can help. Now, let's have a quick look at the contents of the impact report. We started the logs on April the 30th, 2020, and we wanted to respond in the best possible way to needs that were emerging in the community in COVID-19. But we were also responding to the promise and the message from the promise that we should be offering families an integrated experience of services, that families would feel that everyone was working together. So we wanted to show how we've worked together to support families through our impact report. We wanted to learn about the work that we've done so far, and then to improve. We've structured the impact report with the aim of really making it as clear as possible. So we've got the executive summary up at the start with the recommendations and the learning points that Andy will be going through in a moment. And then we explain the basics about what the logs are, the role of the logs in getting it right for every child, and so on in our introduction. And then we've got chapters on the interviews, because interviewing people who consulted with the logs was a key tool that we used. A section on the case studies that we pulled together, and then the really important section where we analysed all of that evidence through focus groups at the logs last September, and we've pulled the ideas together into learning points and recommendations. So that's an outline of the contents of the report. Andy, could you take us through the learning points and recommendations?
Thank you, Mark. I mean, when we were talking about this presentation, Mark and I said, we better try not to talk too much. And I think that once we start to talk about the logs, we tend to get pretty passionate and probably talk too much. The learning points, as the kind of title, probably doesn't really give a real sense of, I think, what the key learning is if you take it all together. So I just wanted to comment on that first of all. I think what we learned was that we are better together, we're better pulling together, and there's a lot of resilience in the city. I think to go back to, the logs didn't just come from nowhere. We had I think a collective discussion in 2018, both the council and the voluntary sector, to try and say, what is it that binds us together? And what we realised was what bound us together was a common values. And I think that when we talk about the promise and being threaded through all the activity in the logs, what is also key is that our common purpose is, why do we come to work in the morning? What are we all about? And what we're all about is trying to do the best for our children and families. And I think that's the key message really about the logs. And that's why there's been such a commitment from everyone. So the learning points from, I suppose, the inquiry we've made is that the first one really is about the logs enable relationships for children, young people, parents and carers. And what's interesting is that we don't do enough, I think, to think about what is key for people. I mean, what's key for us in our work is, do we get on with people and do we feel fulfilled? Why would that be any different for the families that we serve? The relationships are key. And I think what's interesting is that we kind of talk about services, about help, support. In some ways, none of these things are key and will be managed unless they're underpinned by really strong, positive relationships. And I think that in some ways, if we don't work on the relationships as a starting point, then really these things are lost in terms of what we can and can't achieve. The logs were really based on relationships right from the start, and in some ways were evidenced right through. The second point was that really logs match supports and services to their needs. And what was interesting was, through COVID, was the real challenge of, could we, how do we manage to deliver a service? And I think it's really important to think back to that time, because that was a massive challenge for us all. And I think what we tried to then do is say, how do we overcome problems? Now, what's interesting was, now that COVID has subsided and we're back to, I think, what passes for normal, we're at risk of losing that message of how do we reconnect and make sure that people are connected to the right help at the right time. The other bit was the sort of consultees increase their knowledge. What's interesting is that the collective nature of a log, with all that combination of skills and experience, is really deeply profound in terms of what the knowledge there. What people know is incredible. And in some ways, that knowledge is activated through the collective response to trying to identify how to meet needs. So that's a key element throughout that, is that the knowledge is dynamic, alive, and varies over time. So each consultation in some ways brings a unique benefit to a discussion. The fourth bit was teachers use logs to find out what's available. I mean, it's really fascinating, but teachers made up 50% of, at that time, the 550 consultations. It's now up to over 800, I think. And that was more primary school, secondary school. And what we realise is there are key agencies, key centres for our children and families. And of course, schools are going to be a key element to that. So it's very much, the schools quite clearly were reaching out. And it wasn't just individual things we learned as well. You could look at how you could develop more services and wrap around services. The other thing is public health facilitation enables primary carers, GPs to use the logs. And it's interesting, that's such a massive loss in the city of how do we connect to all these GP practices. There was challenges about, I suppose, anonymity, but again, the pilot in southeast and northeast did lead to quite a lot of important learning, and that's something to think about. The other bit is logs partners collaborate to meet needs. What was interesting was that in all of the logs, there was such a combination of people that in that collaboration created potential. And that really is incredible, really, what was able to be achieved. There was not just problem solving, but creativity. And what I suppose the challenge there is that people didn't come along thinking, am I going to take work away? They came along thinking, what can I contribute? And there's something fairly unique about that approach. And I think it's an important learning going forward. If you come along to invest and problem solve, there's a very different dynamic arises compared to when you come along to parcel out resources and give help, as it were. And that's something I think that really needs to be considered going forward. The next bit is integrating services. That unique combination of people meant that we were able to start to look at how could you combine and work differently. And that was the kind of, I suppose, the problem solving. And again, I think that works with the kind of sense of what the promise is all about, is how can people work more effectively together. That links into the promise principles. And I think that's really important, thinking about what does scaffolding really mean? How do we wrap around families? And I think the logs teased that out pretty well. The final bit was anonymous basis of information worked well. And really there's a kind of issue here because some people really struggle with that. And one comment and criticism that's come through of the logs previously was, well, they're anonymous, so how real is that? What's interesting was that if you talk about need in a very pure sense, do you need to know details at that point in time of a particular family? Ironically, the anonymity freed up people's creativity. We didn't have assumptions about families. We didn't say, oh, we know that family. And in some ways, that is really empowering. And I think there's something to be learned going forward on that. I think moving on then to recommendations, I'll really zoom through this because I'm taking up more than my probably fair amount of time, but it's important that we start to think about the logs enabled relationships. And in some ways, we're able to unpack blocks to services and support. The message of the promise is really about, that's what I start off saying, is that nothing will work unless we support how we relate to people. I mean, the City of Edinburgh, in terms of social work, has looked at restorative practice. It's doing with working with rather than doing to or for. And in some ways, how do we strengthen that kind of culture of, I suppose, COVID meant we were on an equal par because we're all facing equal challenges. That deconstructed a lot of assumptions professionally about what we're about. And in some ways, that deconstruction helped us reimagine how we could work together. The promises also tried to do that by saying, let's start with what's important for children and their families. The logs were looking at what was important during COVID. The question post-COVID is what's important now going forward. It will be cost of living, poverty, all the disadvantage, all the things that we've really learned through COVID that we shared challenges. It's what is our shared challenges going forward. The next thing is invest to scale up. We've got, the thing I'm proud about is the logs were achieved with absolutely no cost. There was no money put into this. It was very much done, really strongly supported by EVOC. And if you think about 800 plus referrals of people just coming together, committing their time and resources, and that's across the board, that's really, really awesome. And what could we achieve then with a bit of funding behind that? I think that's the challenge going forward about the different emerging models about how do we support families differently. The issue then was recognise workforce and culture as the priority. It's not just about, I think, meet need. It's about what culture do we want for the city, and what do we want to achieve as a city, and how do we want to be and treat each other? And the behaviours have to start in terms of how we relate to each other as professionals. And in some ways, that key message about how we work together was translated also into how we work with our children and our families. And that's a theme that goes through all of our action. We can't just switch on and off. And I suppose the question then and the promise was, where does love and care relate to professionalism? And I think that's something the logs were able to unpack and engage in very clearly, because when people work with a passion, which I think was quite incredible and continues to be quite incredible. There's an increase of awareness through relationships and networks. I think that what happened was that each locality has developed an identity, and the relationships within these localities have been strengthened, and there have been other benefits of that in terms of what was achievable and what is being achieved. There is a lot to move forward thinking about how do we include and involve GP practices, and I say that's an area that we need to think about going forward, because everyone has a doctor, everyone goes to a doctor at points in time. How can we try and empower them to be more supported in terms of their needs they're identifying? There's live information about availability. Things are never static. The logs are able to, in real time, to identify what is available and to create potential. And that's one of the big fallacies about if we develop lists and resource information, that as soon as you've got that together, it's out of date. The logs are able to, in any system, I think going forward is going to have to be available in real time to be flexible and be able to respond to need. And the final thing is access for community is a big question, is where does this fit with, I suppose, whole family support, the 20-minute neighbourhood. There's a lot of talk about how do we meet needs locally, I suppose, and the question is, what is the learners and the logs got to share for any development within that kind of environment and with these planning? I'm going to stop here, because I think that what I'd suggest is people look at the impact report. The thinking is teased out a bit more about what can and can't be achieved, and what the lessons are to going forward in terms of what we can take forward. I'd refer now to, we're going to move on to the kind of individual presentations from the logs, but what I would suggest is if people have any comments, questions on the presentation, to put that in the chat, and we can probably pull out some responses going forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andy. So we're now delighted to introduce you to our colleagues Janet Blair and Andrina Graham from Southwest Locality. I hope you've gotten okay with your tech challenges. Janet, are you with us? Yes, you are. Fantastic.
Yes.
Okay, over to you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, right. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Janet Blair. I'm the practice team manager for communities and families in Southwest. I'm the co-chair of the Southwest blog, along with Amanda McIntyre from Space at the Brimhouse Hub. And as you've heard, we've been in operation since lockdown. We've got a diverse group of professionals who have micro and macro knowledge of Southwest and the city. Southwest is rich with community involvement, and I'm constantly impressed by the response of the community to ideas, options and offers following referrals. And I'm very proud to be part of the log. The group that I chair asked me to share with you their positive feedback about the log, which they feel gives this time and space to discuss referrals and key priority areas. And I'm now going to pass you over to Andrina Graham from Lifelong Learning, who's going to talk about one of those key areas.
Hi, thank you, Janet. I suppose just moving on from what Andy was saying about the social connections that people need in their life. We had been looking at a trend that was emerging. Sorry, I'm on my phone because my iPad wouldn't work. A local trend that was really emerging through the referrals through the Southwest log, which was around additional support needs and autism. And we felt it was important to respond to that locally, as well as feeding services into families and young people. So I wanted to share a little bit about a little small project that was started up locally that really builds on that importance of the 20-minute neighbourhood and the whole family support approach. We wanted to make sure something was localised and accessible for families so that they were able to feel part of something, really. So by exploring some key themes around the additional support needs, we wanted to be able to delve a bit deeper and consider the impact on families, parenting carers, and what they felt was an important theme. For some, although the inquiry requested support for parenting carers, so not all inquiries came seeking support for parenting carers, but we did feel, you know, we still want to consider what was going on for that family and how they were really managing, even when the request wasn't there. So in terms of the holistic family support, with myself from Lifelong Learning and with Kids, which is a localised project that you'll maybe know about, and the Y project in Wester Hailes, which is a Wee Haven youth project, and actually one of Janet's students in social work, we've created a small project on a Friday afternoon called the Neurodiversity Group. So we're running it at Gate 55. It was a common theme that kept on coming up through the log, and we felt that we wanted to offer something a bit more social and a space for them to gain peer support from other parents, and also for the children to get a space where they felt they could build friendships, be themselves, and kind of access services at the same time. We recognised that one of the key principles for us was flexibility, along with using a community development approach. We felt that a lot of the time services, they're specific in saying you need a diagnosis, or it's only for parents, or it's only for carers, or the children, it's only for the children. So we wanted to offer something that was for everybody. So the group runs on a Friday afternoon, and it is open to parenting carers and their children as well. The setup really is that Gate 55 is quite a large building, so we've managed to offer children and young people a space, you know, along with activities and fun activities, and they've been building friendships, whilst the parents are in another room looking at the key themes that they've identified. Really so that they can get peer support. We recognise that there's a lot of experience in the room. People are coming from different stages in their journey, so it's important that they've got the space and the time to share that. But we've also managed to explore some key learning. So we've looked at themes like around neurodiversity, and also I suppose psychoeducation, like the window of tolerance, name it, tame it, fight, flight, freeze, things like that. Really giving the opportunity for parents to actually explore things that they're interested in. Other things that they're wanting to look at is how to communicate with their children better, respite, funding, how do I respond to my child's behaviour, and how do I look after myself, which are things that we're looking at. So if anyone out there can connect with us, that would be really useful. We've had some fabulous feedback, really from parents and carers. And the biggest thing for me was one week, the first week, when one of the women said, I ken your face, to another woman, and then proceeded to chat for about half an hour outside the building. So really making these local connections. A lot of people already know about services because we're doing such a good job, but they may be isolated, and it's that chance to feel part of something. Another dad was saying that even after just 2 sessions, he feels, because he knows that other people are experiencing similar issues or struggles, that he's already seen a difference in his family. So a small project that was really based on trying to respond to the needs that were emerging quite common through the log. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrina and Janet. Folks, could you please write your comments and questions in the chat as we go on? So I'd like to invite Julie from the Northeast, Julie from the Health Visitors team.
Hi everybody. My name is Julie Drake. I keep saying I'm a new team manager, but it's nearly a year now that I've been in post, and I'm the team manager for the North East, which is the Leith, Restal Riggin, Leith Mount is the areas that I cover. I was invited to Log as part of my role as team manager when I started. And I think it was absolutely came at the right time for me. I have not worked in Leith before. People who know me in this room will know that I'm a Southeast girl. I've been there for a long time, health visiting. So Leith was very new to me. So being able to find out what resources were local and what who I could network with as well was absolutely key for me. I've made lots of connections through Log, found out lots and lots of resources and shared that with the team as well. You probably don't get as many referrals from health visitors because I feel we are quite expert in finding out what is their community profile and finding out what is in the local area. But if we're stuck, we absolutely use it, and we bring some complex cases along to Log as well. So before I came into this post, I was lecturing at Queen Margaret University and on the health visiting and school nursing programme, and it absolutely, to me, the Log fitted for learning for the students as well, for our student health visitors and school nurses. It fits with facilitating health enhancing activities and community profiling, which is part of what they have to do. So a lot of the weeks you'll see me, I bring along a student health visitor, or in the past it was school nurses as well, to increase their learning as well. And they've got a lot from that. They've found a lot of resources and things that they can use when working with families. The last point I wanted to make was very quickly after I came along to Log, I found that I thought there's an awful lot of school-age children here, a lot of school-age referrals, not many under fives, which is my remit, but and I wondered where the school nurses were in this picture. So to start with, I brought along the student school nurses who I knew from the university and got them to observe. And then I got in touch with my colleague, my Ronnie Willits, who's the school nurse manager for Leith area. I'm not sure if Ronnie's been able to make it onto the call because, oh, he has, that's great. And he has just embraced coming along to the Log. He's very active in it. He has connections with all the schools, or all the school nurses in the different schools in the area, and I think it's made a huge difference to the Log myself, that Ronnie's passion for it. You can just see he knows his areas, he knows his schools, he knows what's around, and he's happy to take these referrals and go back to school teachers and things as well. So and it absolutely fits with the new school nurse pathway as well, about, you know, the different resources and things for supporting young people. I think that's probably all I've got. I've maybe not gone as far as 5 minutes, but that was it. The learning points, it absolutely, for me, points 2, 3 and 6, matching supports and services to the need. Consultees increase their knowledge and collaboration to meet local needs. And I've also got some thoughts about your GP practices as well, but I can speak to Mark at another time about that, because I'm quite interested. We meet with all the GPs, all the GP surgeries in our area monthly or 2 monthly, so that we could spread the word about the Log. So that's something easy that health visitors could do as well. Is Ronnie, are you there? Are you able to say a few words?
I am, Julie, yes.
I'll be quiet now.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to thank Julie for bringing me along to the Log. Just everything that she said regards to, we haven't had anybody representing school nursing, so I'm really pleased that I'm representing school nursing within North East. The thing about North East is the boundaries are totally different from what we have within school nursing. It crosses over to Castleberry and things like that. Within school nursing itself, in North East, we see Castleberry as Southeast, so it's very different. So I do talk to my colleagues about the Log and things like that as well over the other side. I think it's really beneficial that there is somebody there. There is lots of, what I've seen is, since I've started the log, there's been more professionals coming on board, which is fantastic. And we work together, we collaborate together, we work together in regards to who's going to take things forward, who's going to be the lead person and things like that. And it's very well structured, and it flows really well too. And that's the important thing as well. I think it's important. Sometimes there is a lot of school-age children. Unfortunately, I can't take everybody on board. But what I try and do is reach out to the ones that I can, and make connections with the schools and things like which I can, or make connections with other school nurses within that area, or within other areas which cover the southeast boundaries within school nursing itself. So I think I'm trying to kind of reach out, as well as kind of like with Julie as well, do my own job as well, and just trying to get that balance out. But I'm really enjoying being part of the log team, and it's really worthwhile, and I do enjoy coming along on the Thursday and things like that. Sometimes I've got to be careful how many referrals I do take forward, because sometimes I'm not able to fulfill all of that, but I'm learning. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie and Ronnie. I've noted there Bridie's comment in the chat about early intervention, that's a really interesting point. And you know, there's a lot of evidence in the report, and that's a theme that we haven't drawn out of it yet in the way that we could. So I think that's something for us all to consider, and it'd be great to have more comments and questions. And now on to the Northwest, and Alex, I think, first of all, Alex from Circle.
Oh, sorry, it's me up first, Mark.
So yeah, I should have known that.
No, not at all.
Thank you.
Us.
Over to you.
So I'm Warwick Wilson, I'm the Chief Executive at Stepping Stones, North Edinburgh, and I co-chair the log with Anne McTiernan. I'm from the Northwest practice team, and Alex from Circle. We've chosen 3 examples that we wanted to briefly chat about today that we feel demonstrate the different aspects of the work of the Northwest log. One of these was brought up by log members, and it was about a busy day in the Northwest log. So in November 2022, we had in our 40-minute meeting, we had 9 new needs forms to discuss. There were a wide range of partners attending that day, including social work, EVOC, parent and carer support, LEYC, ASL, family and household support, police, lifelong learning, and a range of third sector organisations. The majority of the forms, 7 out of the 8, were looking for support for primary age children, and there were a range of needs across the forms. They included areas such as emotional distress, ASD, bullying, depression, anxiety, risk-taking behaviour, and school exclusion. The log members were able to discuss and recommend a wide range of possible supports which could help address these needs from their extensive shared knowledge about local services. And over 20 services were discussed in the 40-minute meeting as possible recommendations that could be taken back to the log consultees. Some of these included One Parent Family Scotland, Grant and Youth, Friends of Awards, Stepping Stones, Sleep Scotland, Be Well Together, Circle, NYDG, Scran Academy, Incredible Years Delivery. So you can see the real breadth of the services that are getting recommended for those different needs. And it highlights that through a quick and simple consultation process, professionals are able to receive an extensive range of options that could benefit the child or young person that they're supporting. The process also leads to an increased knowledge of community services, which can go on to benefit other children and young people. And we felt that this example really highlights the learning points from the impact report about how we have matched supports and services to need, and how consultees increase their knowledge, and how teachers use the log to find out what help is available for their children and young people. Our next example focuses on when the practice team manager for Northwest Social Work identified the need for a multidisciplinary approach towards the vast needs of Romanian families who were residing at Almond House Lodge. So in December 2022, Almond House Lodge were hosting 90 adults and 28 children, all from the Roma community, and the level of help needed for families was extensive. There were high levels of poverty, and Northwest Social Work practice team were receiving reports of young children being left there unsupervised. Some of the log members then volunteered their time to meet with housing and social work to see what supports could be put in place. And following this meeting, the team leader from Family and Household Support took a lead on organising a weekly drop-in at Ammond House, committing a member of staff alongside a family wellbeing practitioner from Stepping Stones to attend each week through December and January. The aim of the drop-in was to promote parenting, health and wellbeing, basic English tuition, as well as other universal services that help families and individuals. The initiative had support from interpretation and translation services and street work, and the drop-in was in high demand with 8 to 10 families attending during the first session. Staff listened to families, assessing their needs and providing them food and refreshments. Every week, more and more families presented, often desperate and destitute, asking for essentials such as clothing, toiletries, nappies and milk. After each drop-in, the team became proactive in sourcing the items requested by families and utilised local contacts and organisations to maximise donations. Fundamental to the success of the drop-in was pulling in supports from different statutory and voluntary organisations, many making the time to attend sessions, including family group decision making and the health visiting team. The result of the initiative was a reduction in demand for duty social work intervention and families becoming more connected with access to local services and organisations and mitigating the impact of poverty by providing essential goods. This initiative was put together across sectors with relative ease, thanks to the relationships and connections that had been fostered through the logs, and the log provided the space for the initial gap in service provision to be flagged. Undoubtedly think that without the logs being in place, that piece of work wouldn't have happened, or certainly if it was to, it would have taken a lot longer to get off the ground, really slowing down the ease of access to services for families. And it highlights again some of the learning points from the impact report, including how partners have collaborated to meet needs, how we've integrated services, and how we've put promise principles into practice. I'm going to quickly hand over to Alex, who's just going to share our last example about a request for support that came from Craigroyston Community High School.
Thank you, Morag. So yeah, I'm just going to look at the third example we have here, which was a request for support from senior management at Craigroyston Community High School in January 2022. The situation at the time was Craigroyston Community High School staff were witnessing and also being contacted by pupils and parents around high levels of food insecurity, related stress and anxiety, which was causing quite a lot of tension in the school and in the local community. So the head teacher and deputy head teacher were invited to the log via Teams, and they were able to explain in person what the situation was to the log group and just give a summary of the challenges they faced. So what we did was look at how we could respond to the immediate need around food insecurity. As many people know, there's a well-established and excellent community supports and community-based organisations providing support in Northwest Edinburgh currently, and particularly in the small north area. So we made contact with a number of agencies, Fresh Start, Hilton Community Health Project, for example, to provide food and immediate resource to families. And we also looked at a way that we could build the knowledge and understanding of school staff, parents and young people around the supports that are available in the area. So we also set up an open day with professionals, statutory and voluntary sector professionals. That was an afternoon session. It didn't go hugely well. We didn't really have many people coming in. So I guess a learning for us from that was to capitalize on, for example, a parents' evening. So we have, we're able to get the information to parents when they're actually coming into the school anyway, rather than setting something up separately. Some of the links, I think, there, the immediate response that we were able to do, links to the learning points around the logs matching supports and services to the needs in the community very quickly, which we were able to do, and partners collaborating to meet needs, and bringing in community partners that are specialists in that area and have the resources that could be matched to the need. And the second link is around the recommendation, which was to invest to scale up linkage processes between people and communities and services, such as helping through parents' evenings as building in links to parents and schools so they're more aware of what's available in their local community. So that was our third example. We're probably over time. I'll hand back to Mark or Andy.
Thanks very much, Alex. So now it's over to Paula to tell us about the experiences in the Southeast.
Hi, I'm sorry you've just got me. The rest of the log didn't volunteer themselves, so here I am. So in Southeast then, we've got an average of a core membership of about 10 cross-sector individuals coming, which we have established good working relationships, both during throughout the log experiences and beyond. So what we want to focus on is we were one of the pilot areas to have GP referrals coming in and GP practices. So and that's worked pretty well. We've had a lot of referrals that have come in from GPs. I think going forward, if we're going to roll out that offer across the city, we really need to be looking at how they then communicate back with us, because often the logs come together and referred out and given information, contacted, given options, whatever, but we don't know if it's actually getting through to the people, the children and their families. So that would be something that we would want to take forward. In terms of our, like everywhere else across the city, a high number of ASD or ASN referrals came to the South East log. And we've taken a real multi-agency approach and always managed to provide information or a resource. Resources are heavily reliant in the South East on the voluntary sector partners around the table. And we were lucky enough that 2 of our log members were leads for the lots around the mental health framework. So that's a really good example. If we didn't have the mental health framework as a funded resource, we wouldn't be struggling in South East to respond to a lot of the referrals that had come in. So that's allowed us to take a really child-led approach around that. So yeah, I'm very much keen to make sure we get resource coming into the South East log. We really liked having an ASL membership, again because of the ASN ASD referrals that are coming in. And going forward, we're really keen to make sure that we've got a stronger relationship with our CAMS linkages. We don't have any tier 3 allocated workers in the South East yet, and I know there's a recruitment issue, so we're hoping when that takes place that we can have a bit of synergy in terms of resource around that. A good example of us coming together, being responsive to emerging need, Liberton High School had identified a group of young ladies who needed specific support. So as a result of that, Children First, Canongate and Back on Track, which is one of the mental health providers in the South East, have come together to facilitate a young girls group. So that's going to start as of next week. But that's again of just us trying to respond to local needs and again replicating what's happened across the city. The South East log wanted to say that they feel that they've given good advice and for all inquiries that have come in, and if we've not been able to offer a debt resource, we've come up with many possibilities and signposting around that. But as a working group coming together from different backgrounds, we've built up really strong relationships and continue to evolve and do things out with the log. So that's South East.
Thank you so much, Paula. So we've now got 5 minutes or so for any questions and comments from the floor. And then we have Bridie Ashrawan, EVOC's Chief Executive, who's going to pull together her thoughts about some of the connections, taking the learning forward. Over to you, Andy.
Yeah, so just yes, I'm not used to using Zoom, so I wasn't sure whether it was muted or not. So yeah, I'd be really interested if there's any comments or questions. There is one question in the chat about information sharing. We'll just see what that is. See. Just get it. Yeah, any information sharing barriers, and how did we negotiate or navigate that? I mean, I can maybe comment initially. One of the reasons we had all referrals anonymised was that when we were trying to do things really quickly, and the logs were set up within about 2 to 3 weeks of an idea to kind of action. And what we did was try to avoid all the complexities. So the simple way was to make things anonymous. And then the information was contained by the referrer in some ways. So what was then, there was an ability then to discuss need and to feed back to referrers. So I think that was how we bypassed it. And going forward, if this is it, the whole concept is developed, how do we then overcome some of the complexities and hold on to the practice in a way? And that's something that's going to have to be tackled, in the next period of time, I think, if the logs were to be expanded. So any other questions from it or comments from people? Yeah. So, sorry, yeah, do the families know they've been discussed and do they have consent? Yeah, I think we can answer that with yes. It's not, the anonymous is at the end of the logs part, not at the beginning of the process in a way. I think that's how we manage that. Anyone else want to comment on that question that's in the chat? Okay, any other comments or questions? I just would want to maybe say a couple of things, because it really strikes me. The examples of the wraparound at Craig Royce and some of the things about Liberton High, there's there about whether you individualise help or whether you find a theme and address it. And one of the problems I have with referral processes is that, does that mean that the young person's got, our family's got the issue, or does the community? And there's something about the logs which creates that capacity to look beyond an individual referral, to try and say there's a class of issues here, or a range of concerns, and how do we creatively address that? And to me, that's pretty empowering for families, because it's no longer, I'm struggling with food, or this child is not getting enough to eat. It's more about, there's a group of children who are really struggling. And I think that in some ways destigmatizes things. I'm using the wrong word, stigmatize, yeah, but also empowers people to be much more creative and innovative in saying, what is the capacity within a community? And I think we've only really scratched the surface of that potential, because in some ways we've worked without a broader license for how do you access all of the capacity within an area. And I think that's, to me, some of the potential that we're almost just beginning to kind of start to identify going forward. So any other kind of questions or comments from people? So, question. Okay, the question of how the third sector can get involved in the logs. Well, in reality, probably logs are more than 50% of the third sector. It's that partnership. So I think that for individual members of organisations, it's I think make contact with Mark and EVOC colleagues, and we can look to how any organisation can have an active role within the logs. The aim is to have a collective. It's not that you're on the logs and that's you. It's about how do we all engage and kind of create ongoing capacity. Brady, you've got your hand up. So just over to you, Brady. I don't know if you can hear me. You've got your hand up.
Yes, I'm really, it's been so moving to hear the examples. Huge thanks, everybody. I'm curious to hear from, as a question further up, if you can hear me. I'm not sure if my internet's a wee bit slow. Just what our advice would be from Janet and others about getting awareness raised of senior colleagues on where this is working.
Okay, that's a question of how do we get, I think that I could probably answer that in relation to the logs need to be considered in relation to any kind of city development in terms of whole family support. The single point of access is currently obviously being looked at and will be trialled in North West. But I think that what we're all quite keen is to work out how do we hold on to the benefits of this kind of collaborative working while we try and, I suppose, tease out how can things evolve into a broader approach. I think the logs are one example of a range of collaborations. So the question is, the log impact report's been circulated pretty widely. I think that what we're talking about is potentially having an event as well to try and tease out a bit more of the learning and try and look at where are we at as a group of people collectively trying to address issues and what can we learn and how can we impact on, I suppose, what the future is going to be in relation to that range of, whole family support is what the government's view is of the way forward. So I think it's more about how do we help to, there's issues regarding duplication. Yeah, I think what we're going to have to look at is how does all this fit together in a way that doesn't overcomplicate the landscape, but holds on to the uniqueness of what the logs offer. And I think that, so there's a question there about how do we avoid multiple services have been advised to the consultee. I think that then my understanding is what's fed back is that, like most things, it can be then down to a choice of what's going to be the best fit for someone. And it wouldn't be that lots of services would then be offered, it'd be lots of services could be considered. And, obviously the ferry can then look at what's the most appropriate match for that, along with the family. So one of the big issues is that when things come to logs is that people feel quite stuck or feel that there's a question about, is there an option available? Any other questions or comments? I'll probably move on to, sorry, Mark.
No, I didn't have any questions, Andy. I
Okay.
think you've just spotted. I've put a comment in the chat in response to the question about consent. That's an important one. Time to hear from Bridie. Andy,
Yep.
We've got 5 minutes left.
Okay, I think Bridie's going to kind of sum up. I'll hand over to Bridie.
Well, I just want to say it's been fascinating listening, and thank you for the opportunity, because I think the key thing is about next steps. But in that listening, one of the things I really heard was incredible collaborative muscle going on in terms of actually people really working cross sector with initially very agilely, and also then actually really within existing resources. But right the way through to now, when we need to advocate that actually this way of working is making a difference in early intervention, and how do senior staff who are looking at new programs become aware of that. So I think I'd be advocating for senior education managers hearing about the impact on head teachers and teachers who were able to get different outcomes for families. EVOC did actually use reserves, significant reserves, to invest in this. It wasn't actually something we were able to do within our existing resource from the City Council. And I suspect, for example, there was a reference earlier from Paula to the mental health framework, and others have described new services that have been created quite agilely, locally, and go an ongoing sense as well. These things are really contribute, I think, as we've heard, to the promise, to children getting better outcomes and being more likely to stay with their families and keeping families together. I'm also quite curious whether or not there's something there around prevention of homelessness. I've just come from the homelessness task force this morning. I'd be really curious whether or not anybody here has examples of that in terms of next steps, that we could go back to the homelessness network task force. We have an increasing number of families in temporary accommodation. We have an increasing number of people presenting as homeless, especially men. And you know, to what extent is this as a result of things like family breakdown? So I'm really curious about strategic forums you feel we should be taking this through to, right the way through to community planning. Because the promise, in a way, is something we've committed to in Edinburgh, but is it really in the job descriptions of every senior manager to then work across the piece in terms of community planning, then as it comes out into things like the Children's Partnership, that actually result in us addressing wicked problems? Because here, it seems to me, people really have addressed the problems that are harder to address together by really listening and by finding the right solution and an agile way that was really tailored by listening to each other, but also by listening to the family. Another next step for me is actually to make sure to hold on to the fact that we did see significant concerns in our Black and ethnic minority families and the Roma families. That was significantly a concern all the way through. At EVOC, we hope to work with the National Lottery to raise resource for further and deeper support around that. And that remains a concern with across Scotland, 1 and 2 children in BME families in poverty. So I think some of these statistics, though, that increasing statistic in terms of poverty, things like families being in temporary accommodation for longer periods, I think what you're doing here is actually preventing that from happening, and all sorts of other early intervention pieces of work. So I think our job at EVOC, as well as with LIYC, is to take to all of this to the key strategic forums that you think we should. So I'm keen to hear from all of you about those people that we think we should put it in front of, because this has been absolutely incredible. Edinburgh acted early in COVID, but takes it right the way through to the present day, and that we ensure that as the new single point of access investment, wellbeing family, the wellbeing fund, these investments are all learning from the logs going forward. Because you've evolved practice over 2 years, not just a theoretical idea, you've evolved really great practice. So I just want to say thank you to every single person who stepped up to the mark right from the beginning through to now. We're listening, and also we're your champion of this incredible collaborative muscle that you've shown. You've made a huge difference in families' lives. That's the bottom line. Let's keep doing that together. So, and I completely agree about Scottish Government. The Scottish Government were informed of this work in terms of, see the question in the chat, by our adult health and social care colleagues. We need to make sure our children and families colleagues are also talking to the Scottish Government about this work. I myself at the homelessness task force this morning mentioned it in front of the Scottish Government in terms of homelessness as an example of early intervention. So yeah, let's find ways to make sure the Scottish Government are aware of this report. And we have children in Scotland who have a third sector interface member of staff, Catherine, who is obviously known to many of you here as an EVOC member of staff as well, who can take that forward. And I know Catherine was on the call earlier in terms of Scottish Government awareness. Edinburgh acted early and innovatively. Well done, everybody. Enough for me. I'm going to hand back to Mark. I hope those are, and to Andy.
We had the Children and Young People's Improvement Collaborative from the Scottish Government were actually involved in the very first log meeting. And you know, they've continued to be involved, and we've been in touch with them in the last week about the impact report. Could I just echo everything that Bridie said, and what immediately occurs to me is that colleagues who've presented today from the logs, would you be willing to present to a Children's Partnership in the way that you presented today? Because I think that would be very powerful. And over to Andy to close.
I mean, I think what's come across is clearly the passion that's there. I mean, people turn up week on to do the best they can, and that's quite incredible. And I think that there is a need in some ways. We're typically Scottish, I suppose. We don't sing our praise that well, or present so well about our achievements. And I think we need to think about that going forward, because my anxiety is that the unique quality of this has been about our respect for each other and almost our equality about we're all in the same situation, and our deep respect for our families. And it's not about some kind of providing help, it's about trying to make sure we do the best. And I think that's the quality that is really makes the logs so unique. And in some ways, my anxiety, and I think the anxiety for the city going forward, is any change in innovation can either build on that, or we can go back the way into, which is about processing people and providing resources. And I think that once you've worked in this kind of way, it's very hard to think about another model. So what we need to try and do is not just promote the idea of the logs, but in some ways give that key message is that relationships are at the core of all that we do. And unless we try and work to nurture relationships, they have to be worked on. They have to be nurtured and protected in order to thrive. And in some ways, that's the thing we need to think about going forward. How do we give that key message? Because you take all the complexity away, the simple thing is that people have spent time together, they've grown to respect each other and appreciate what they offer. And that's what makes things work. And often that's the bit that's forgotten in all the innovations and all the things we try and do. So we need to put relationships at the start, the middle, and the end of everything. And beyond that, everything is just process after that, ultimately. But without that, that's the magic ingredient that makes things work. So I just want to thank you all for today, and it's been inspirational just hearing the examples as well. We are looking to have an event on the 14th of June, which I think is more about taking a bit more time to reflect and to say, how do we build on this? And I think it's more going to be a revisit to the 2018 time when we all got together to say, what is it that binds us together? Not just about logs, but as about a community of practice. And how do we build that for the city going forward? Because there is a risk that post-COVID, we all fall back into our old ways. Very quickly, we forget about how hard it is for families, because that was what gave us that oomph to do differently. So maybe we need to think about how do we keep our oomph going. So it's time for lunch for everyone. So I think it's maybe thanks everyone for your attendance today. It's been really inspiring.
Thank you all.